We lost a significant portion of American agriculture that's not coming back this season. This is the first gargantuan loss. It's massive. It truly is. And moving forward, we're going to start to see more of these events, this Grand Solar Minimum. This is it. We're out of time. If you're not prepared, you must. If you don't know how to grow food, you're going to have to learn. This is exactly the points that myself and so many others across this Grand Solar Minimum space are talking about.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying Grand Solar Minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
And I do welcome you this morning. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Your food prices are going to start to skyrocket right now due to the massive flooding that happened across the Midwestern grain belts of the United States. I know we have some international listeners today. These are the most heavy recorded floods ever across the croplands in the last 150 years. When I say devastation, it's kind of an understatement. Areas are inland deltas. The amount of rain that came down was biblical. And any other type of end time, ancient traditions passed down of these massive weather events, this was one of those. Dams were not overtopped, they were washed away. I saw the Spencer Dam. It's a relatively medium-sized dam, nothing large, not really small either. It's a hydroelectric dam. It was washed away, concrete and all. There was a skeletal remains structure of just where the main buttresses of concrete were. That's it. And even parts of those were ripped away from the floodwaters. And then looking at a live video of the actual event, the little tiny river that's maybe 100 feet across turned into a 2-mile wide flow. Infrastructure's gone. Even if they have the crops and even if they can plant, they'll never be able to get it out of the fields. And when I say infrastructure, I mean thousands of roads, rail lines, bridges, and to get it, drive this point home to you, these floods are so widespread. And you got to realize that last year we call it in the silos. That's what the carryover stocks is all about. So when we're looking at the grain report, which I'm going to revisit because I think it's so integrally important that you really understand what's happening with the grains on our planet and the food pricing, and you're going to get priced out. These crop losses, we lost our grain stores in the United States. At the moment, they counted 38% losses of all stored grain in America, and it's called adulterated. You're not going to be able to repurpose it, reprocess it, resell it. They're going to burn it or get rid of it the best way they can. And you would say, well, David, why don't they give it to the animals? Well, I'm sorry, almost all of the animals were washed away in the floods as well. Millions and millions and millions of livestock.
And speaking of cycles, life and death rhythms of ancient empires, climatic cycles influence rule of dynasties, a predictable pattern of religion, war, prosperity, and debt. This book available on Amazon. The Life and Death Rhythms of Ancient Empires outlines the flow of history from 3000 BC into the Wolf Minimum, 1400 AD, identifying factors causing the rise and fall of dominant cultures, which then could be roughly forecast in terms of hundreds of years. A review of ancient history provides the basis for a glimpse into the future. This century's global temperature increases, which so excites environmentalists, can be shown to be part of a 1,000-year climate cycle. Research has shown that periods of hot and dry climate or cold and dry climate have effects on human behavior. Dominant, prosperous societies have occurred at roughly 200-year intervals, which can suggest timelines for societies into the future, enabling a forecast that the USA might lose world dominance in 2040. If you want to support this broadcast, click the link in the description box to explore more about life and death rhythms of ancient empires and climatic cycles influence rule of dynasties. It's available in both paperback and Kindle versions and lays out succinctly where we're going in the next 20 years in terms of the Grand Solar Minimum.
The chemical contamination, along with the sewage treatment plants, that 50 of them, 50, were inundated themselves. This is an ecological disaster in its own right, just from all the pollution, contaminants, dead animals. You're going to have millions of rotting cows in the fields. Rotting farm animals, pigs, chickens. They have more than what they have, 200,000, 300,000 cows that they've counted stuck on these little islands. So when the water flooded in, some of the higher points created islands. Got 100,000 cows just visible from helicopters. Oh, what are we going to do with those? Farmers, rescuing their own cows using backhoes stuck in the mud. I mean, literally the mud flows were so deep, 4 or 5 feet deep, that these cows just snouts are above the mud. And we lost a significant portion of American agriculture that's not coming back this season. This is the first gargantuan loss. It's massive. It truly is. And moving forward, we're going to start to see more of these events. This Grand Solar Minimum, this is it. We're out of time. If you're not prepared, you must. If you don't know how to grow food, you're going to have to learn. This is exactly the points that myself and so many others across this Grand Solar Minimum space are talking about. Now that a part of American agriculture is gone, they don't know how many millions of acres they won't be able to plant this year because it's underwater. They're talking about floods lasting into summer. So a substantial part of the Midwest grow belt is offline now. So how much of a dent is this going to make into our actual yields coming out? Maybe that's not so important as the stored grains that we had. Not me, myself, but our country. If you're not from the United States, I'm speaking as a U.S. citizen. But those of you outside the U.S., that's going to affect you too. You can't tell me that we lose 40% of American grain stocks underwater, flooded out, and that was what they were selling to the rest of the world. Buyers will have to find other sources, from corn to sorghum and wheat. And I'm talking about all the wheat. Miller, number one, Miller's wheat, white wheat, hard red, spring wheat, all of it that was stored in any silos on local farms, in the grain depositories or grain dispensaries, grain shipment centers. It's all underwater. It's gone. I don't know how to describe it. You're going to have to grow your own food starting right now. So whatever you're doing, you are going to have to learn how to grow food. If this doesn't wake you up, I'm sorry, you're never going to get woken up and you can just turn off the channel and go elsewhere, because your time's going to be better spent watching TV. As it moves down, these crop losses are absolutely going to be censored in our media. Whether you think United States has free media and all these rights and everything, it doesn't. We are going to be absolutely censored on how much of this grain is lost, because that news coming out drives futures prices. This spooks markets. This is if we were on our own and we had no international shipping, this would be a devastating famine event. If we were to go back to the 1600s, we would just have encountered the beginning of a mass famine. Luckily today, we are able to import. Now, what does this do? Where's the other 60% of the grains that's laying around in the United States? And then subtract that, what we're not going to be able to grow this year. And then where are we going to lie at the end of the year with the carryover stocks and also the reduced yields coming out of the fields? I mean, it's everywhere you look across the planet. Everything, the size of everything grown is reduced, from the potatoes to the carrots to the size of the cabbage, the non-blooming of so many vegetables, the reduction in the size of the kernels, not only in the corn, but in the wheat. Everything is shrinking because the plants are going into conservation mode due to the changes in the sun electromagnetically. They know what's coming. Plants are conserving their energy. So where does that leave us as the humans down here trying to cope with everything? This is the planting season. And if you have never once in your life planted anything, it is time for you to start right now. You need to learn how to grow food. By the end of 2019, everything you buy is going to be approaching 50 to 100% increase in prices. They're already talking supermarkets raising prices this week. Now, growing food is going to be a learning curve in its own right. Talk to Christian over at Ice Age Farmer. Talk to myself trying to grow things hydroponically, do a city urban garden. There's all kind of problems with wind. And now everything you do in the fields is going to get wetter. So how are you going to protect your plants? And what can you supplement? What are you going to grow? Like Brussel sprouts. These are amazingly, I don't know if, I always make the joke about, eating your Brussels sprouts when you're a kid. But anyway, it's the highest dense nutritional plants out there. What can you grow? Wetter conditions, carrots, maybe these tuber crops are going to have to protect your grow stash, if you will. Kale, that's another winner. If you're thinking about a list of vegetables to try to grow, I know some of you in cooler climates can grow kale, but you're going to have to think about two different things. A, protecting them while you're growing them. So underground vegetables such as radishes, sweet potatoes. By the way, you can just live on sweet potatoes. It's like coconut. If you have coconut and sweet potatoes, you can stay alive. It has enough nutrition between those two that you could absolutely live on that. Now it would be a boring diet for sure, but after your body adjusts, you could stay alive eating those two alone, plus drinking the coconut water. So we're going to have to think about crops growing under the ground. But at this level of flooding, it wouldn't matter what you had. It's completely gone. Our modern infrastructure and mechanized transportation systems, et cetera, we relied too much on technology and we've consolidated everything into one basket. And not only that, the roads are washed out. If you look at the Nebraska State Police closure map, I did a full video on this. The reason I'm talking about it so in depth is I did a full video. Our modern bridges going over rivers with 4-lane highways on them, those are girthy. Those are built strong. Those were washed away like matchsticks. If they do even grow it, how are they going to transport it? Because just to the rural roads, the berms that sometimes they would use to travel on, some of these gravel roads, the levee breaks, it's going to take years just to even get the roads back and repaired. Years, plural. Now, how are they going to go in there and grow anything? How are they going to access their fields? And how are they going to get that food to market? So it's not just as simple as waiting for a field to dry out on this. This is a devastating loss of American agriculture. And I encourage you to do your own research on how much is lost. I'll give you the site here that I've been following for some of the updates. This comes off of this is Michael Snyder's site, endoftheamericandream.com. Now, he has been compiling, as the news reports roll in, what's happening with this catastrophic flooding. And he says also it's going to mean a dramatic drop in U.S. food production. So just to start off with, it is absolutely the worst flooding disaster in the history of U.S. farming across the Midwest, period. This was that bombogenesis that rolled off the Pacific and then just started spinning and pulled all the Gulf moisture up. Record rains everywhere, record snowfall, record rains, record winds, record barometric pressure, record set. It was an all-time event. It's got to be from the Grand Solar Minimum intensification, but the weather forecasters don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. How the sun could affect our climate on the planet, because that throws the whole global warming narrative into a shambles. And they can't tax you. They can't put in the global tax if the sun's driving the climate.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at trueleafmarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. trueleafmarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
They can't scare you anymore into the Agenda 2030 programs to squeeze you into small boxes and control your lives and control everything you consume. And the fear factor of, oh, if I do this, there'll be a little more CO2. That will quickly go away because in all reality, CO2 is not driving the climate. The sun is. And we're going into a 400-year decline in solar activity on its cycle. The regular 11-year solar cycle, we're in the bottom of that anyway right now, progressing into solar cycle 25. Solar cycle 24 is tapering off. We're at the bottom of the cycle right now. Sunspot activity is nil at the moment. Haven't been sunspots. There were a couple last week. But this is so quickly gone from incredibly high solar activity that we hadn't seen in thousands of years into just dropping straight off the cliff of electromagnetic activity from the sun, boom, straight down into a grand solar minimum. So these more juiced events coming from the sun are going to have a greater impact on our Earth moving forward too. You're going to have to think about electric grid down situations from the CME. Two things you need to be aware of here. Now, these kind of dovetail together. How prepared are you for emergencies? Like, for example, this flood. There were some areas where people are stuck because all the roads are washed out and they just don't literally have a way to get out of there because they can't cross the rivers, they can't go down the roads, so they're stuck in an island of washed out roads. Although the area they're in has not been flooded, it's just all the access points have been blown out. How prepared are you? How much water do you have? How long do you think it's going to be before those sewage treatment plants come back on and it's even safe to take a shower with that stuff? You know, it's not about just drinking water. You have cooking and bathing. Contaminated water will make you sick through your skin. Even one drop in your eye, one drop in your mouth by accident, one drop up the nose, oops. And the amount of contamination in that water is beyond filthy. It's nasty. Think about all the farm residue. You have to think about all of the fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides got washed away in the flood as well, down into some cesspool somewhere, scattered throughout the land. And what's the chemical damage going to do to the land? Like I say, how many millions of gallons of liquid herbicides get dispersed into the fields like Roundup? What do you think that's going to do to the rest of the agriculture? That was not GMO, that was not factory farming, that was not mechanized industrial scale. It's going to ruin the rest of the land. You really need to take a look at what's going into the water and what got churned downstream in the water. And that's all soaking into our stored grains. That's why they're calling it adulterated. They won't even touch it because U.S. government knows how much contamination is in the water, and it's actually poison grain at this point. There's no way to salvage it. The worst flooding disaster in the history of the Midwest will be remembered as one of the greatest events in agriculture across the history books of the world, or at least in the United States. And if you think I'm exaggerating at all, please do your own research. Let's start with a couple bullet points here. It should be well into the planting season in May, which there won't be a planting season in so many places where we traditionally grow our grains, to know which crops are going to be not as robust this year in terms of yield or just planting itself. Midwest farmers, the insurance industries can't cover them. The losses are really that large that they're already talking about private insurers are already bankrupt just days after the claims are coming in. So now the U.S. government's going to have to step in and try to pay out the claims that the local insurers cannot. It is so all-encompassing that the insurance industry has just been bankrupted in farm country in the Midwest Plains states. Any carrier that was offering flood insurance, crop loss insurance, etc., for any of these thousands and thousands of farmers, they can't pay. Literally 100% of people are claiming at the same time, devastating 100% losses. So as you can see, the money trail dries up at this point. They're waiting for the floodwaters to dry out. At the moment, they have 9 million acres of farmland that's not going to be planted due to floodwaters. Even in here, they're talking about roads being washed away, rail lines being washed away, entire small towns washed away. Even if farmers had something left to sell, they couldn't get it to market. There's no roads, very few roads. Most rural roads are covered in feet thick of mud. And if you've ever been around a flood, in the aftermath of a flood, it's thick, like really thick. I was in a flood in Pai, Thailand back in, it was late 1990s, where a remnant of, or a typhoon off the Pacific, hurricane, same spinning cyclonic formation called a typhoon out in the Pacific, rolled in over Vietnam, North Vietnam, rolled over Laos, and then went into that top part of northern Thailand. Well, it was going to overtop a dam there too. So what they decided to do, the Thai authorities, was release all the water as much as they could, open the gates full. The dam overtopped anyway, and a massive wall of water rolled down the river. Now, after the flooding was finished, everything was covered in feet and feet of just silt. And it was difficult. Everybody in the town was pitching in to try to get roads open because everything was closed there too. Because the Pai at the bottom of the town up there, it goes right to the river. Well, it flooded so far inland, almost a kilometer came in. All the roads on the bottom part of the town were closed too. The bridges, part of it broke, and it was a full-on effort. Anybody who was up there, even if you're on holiday, it was kind of like pitch in because you're not going to get fed until those trucks come through again, or you need to head over the mountain range over into another part and try to work your way out that way. So it's dirty, messy cleanup. And it is slow, because every time this is a personal example. Our friends own this, I would say, bungalow hotel. They had, I think, 10 or 12 of these bungalows right on the riverfront. So we were trying to help them get back down there to see what was going on. I was curious myself. So we shoveled a little pathway through. It was only about 400 or 500 feet long. So we shoveled 400 or 500 feet down to right at the river edge side there. But by the time we turned around, all the mud had slowly creeped back in and filled in everything we just shoveled. So we had to do it 3 or 4 times before we kind of pushed off to the edge. So even as it creeped back in, it left an open pathway. So it's not just like snow plowing where you go through one time and you blow the mud off the side of the road and you're all good. It's still wet, it's mucky, it's thick, it's moving. So how many times are they going to have to re-scrape the roads? There's no roads left. I'm going to not say 100%, but there's an enormous amount of structural damage to these roads. So even if you have like a backhoe and you go in and you take all the mud and silt off there and you put it over the right side. Subscriber of mine wrote in and said, yeah, what about all the ditches to carry away the water? All the ditches are filled in too. So we need the side berms that are coming off the sides of the roads. Usually you get 3-4 foot ditch that'll carry excess water away. Those are all filled in too. So they're going to have to go in and dig all of those out. We're actually really talking about a 1930s project of road building again across this part of America. It'll be a job creator for sure. They're going to have to redo everything across several states, not just a single state. You got to realize the multi-state event right in the middle of the crop zones. So let me continue with the article here. I wanted to get the bullet point. Yeah, so many rivers had set all-time record high levels that bridges were overtopping. 2 dams washed away completely. Levees broken. And everybody out there said, I've never seen anything like this before. Now, here's the thing. The feed for the farmers, so stored grains in a silo that's counted in the national totals for how much grain is available as stocks inside the United States for export is something very different than a farmer having feed stored on their property to feed their cattle or pigs or whatever their livestock might be out there. Farmers are reporting that's all gone too. So even if they get back to it, they're all going to have to buy more grain too, and that's going to pull from the national supply. The loss of the farm animals themselves, again, it's into the millions, plural, and every single farmer that they talk to, like for example, one guy had 70 head, he's like, we've got 7 left. One guy says, I have 140 head, I can find 3 of them. And you got to think about agriculture. We don't have like one super giant, factory facility with silos, 3,000 silos deep, where everything from the Midwest goes to like one point and it just sits in one place and then we export from there. It doesn't work like that. It's almost like a decentralized web in itself, where this township, this county, this city area might have a storage facility, and then 20 miles down the road, they're going to have another storage facility. And it's kind of dots like this across to supply. When they get an order in or when a foreign buyer comes in, they can consolidate and load up the barges. It's not all in one single place in one gigantic store unit somewhere. It's spread out. So were the floods. So when you get reports from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, flood-soaked wheat, corn, and soybeans are considered adulterated and they must be destroyed. So anything that's wet, the U.S. government's requiring that the farmers destroy it. Now, again, how are they going to destroy it? Unknown, but we shall see. All right, so anything that they do have, they still can't get to market, and the roads are even more inundated they've had more bridge collapses. You have to realize the massive floods that rolled down the rivers do stabilize the pilings under, and some of them have had a few more days of erosion and are starting to collapse as well. So the initial onslaught of these tsunami floods inside the rivers rolling down the valleys, that just destabilized everything. And now they're still getting more rain to add to the totals, more erosion, and they're still having more bridge collapses. So this is going to take a long time to get fixed up. Now, you already understand that the grains here, I'm going to pull up another report as we move through. Now, keep this in mind. These floods are so encompassing that it includes these states. But these are the places that have massive flooding, and crop planting is in question in these areas. South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, and Illinois.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.